With less than 2 weeks to go before the 70th anniversary of the Workers' Party in North Korea, Kim Jong-un steps up his saber rattling. In Bangladesh, ISIS apparently murders an Italian out for a jog. Plus, will the new US-China cyber deal be anything more than just a show? These stories are coming up next. This is the Asia Brief. A very good morning to you all. It is Wednesday, the first day of this week of podcasts, but the hump day of the week and the final day of September. That's right, September 30th, 2015. My name is Steve Miller, and as always, thank you so much for joining me today. We'll go ahead and begin with a story about Kim Jong-un and North Korea. We know that 2015 marks the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. It also happens to be the 70th anniversary of the Workers' Party. That's right, the governing body of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, otherwise known as North Korea. Now, just as China held a very big and very public celebration this year, marking the end of World War II, we also expect to see a similar huge celebration in Pyongyang, in North Korea, marking the 70th anniversary of the Workers' Party. Now, a lot of chatter has been given that either on October 9th or on October 10th, the anniversary of the first nuclear test in North Korea, or perhaps the satellite launch, we will see a similar activity this year. And in fact, North Korea has said it is preparing both a long-range missile test or a satellite launch and a nuclear test to mark the 70th anniversary. But if we take a look at satellite imagery, if we take a look at what's really going on in North Korea, are they? Well, according to Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and its think tank 38 North, we don't see any significant activity. We don't see a launch vehicle yet at the site. We don't see any fueling activity. We don't see any VIP housing preparations. Now, remember, the DPRK did add extra height to the gantry at its launch facility. So if they are going to launch a long-range missile or perhaps a satellite, this is exactly where we would expect to see it being done. And you know what? We see some activity, but by and large, we see nothing. Well, this leads to, frankly, three possibilities. Number one, nothing will happen on October 9th or 10th. Number two, they're going to rush to a launch within the next 10 days or so. Or three, they have another facility that they're prepping that we don't know about. And that's if they're going to prepare for a missile launch. They could also just go ahead with a nuclear test in which we do see some activity. But I'll get to that in a moment. One thing to factor in is if North Korea goes ahead, what's going to transpire next with China? After a meeting with the United States and President Obama last week, President Xi Jinping told reporters that China was opposed to any actions that might cause tension in the Korean Peninsula or violate UN Security Council resolutions. In fact, it also appears that Xi sent a message to Pyongyang indicating that Beijing would stand with other UN members in efforts to take further actions against North Korea if it went ahead with either the nuclear test or a missile launch. However, we have seen that kind of response from China before. A lot of show. Harsh words followed by a minimal response. Bruce Bennett, the senior defense analyst at the RAND Corporation, says that he feels Kim Jong-un absolutely needs to do something big this particular anniversary, and I agree. It may be a missile test, it may be a nuclear test, both of which are long overdue. And as I previously mentioned, we do see some activity at the Yongbyon facility. That's where they do their nuclear testing. If the DPRK does nothing this anniversary, and I'm not talking about a repeat showing of these multiple short-range missiles launching off the coast, which we have seen several times in the past, if they do nothing, it will cast serious doubts on their programs. And I'm really not sure if that would play well into Kim Jong-un's public persona. Remember, he's pushing the scientific advancements in North Korea. Also, keep in mind, North Korea has made many claims in the past that they would launch a satellite, that they would conduct a nuclear test, and they've always pulled back. They can't keep doing that. Remember, this is a major anniversary. If we take a look at South Korea, heading south of the DMZ, President Park Geun-hye has criticized Kim and North Korea again, while conveniently omitting that, in my opinion, she was duped in the last round of talks that ended the landmine crisis. Remember, during that agreement, South Korea heralded that North Korea would carry out no provocative actions, no nuclear tests, no missile launches, and that they agreed to family reunions in October. Well, guess what? North Korea has now threatened to pull out of those family reunions, just like I predicted. North Korea's Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of Korea said in a statement, because of the reckless anti-DPRK confrontational racket of the South, the rare reunions of separated families are at stake like being on a thin ice. Again, this is exactly what I would say would take place. Moving forward, the question we have to ask is not whether or not there will be a test, because at some point there will be. North Korea is not going to stop pursuing nuclear weapons, not going to stop pursuing their launch capabilities. What we do need to ask is how the West responds. If South Korea, if the United States, if the United Nations responds the same as it has in the past, all we do is reset the cycle of events. It's time to break the cycle. With China sitting on the UN Security Council, it might actually be time to bypass that entity, because the process of using the UN Security Council to rein in North Korea simply isn't working. I've said this before. It's time to shut up or put up. It's time to act. When we think of the Islamic State in the Asia Pacific, a lot of times we think of attacks and actions carried out in Australia. We think about the roundup of radicalized youth. We think about that deadly cafe shootout and the threats of beheadings. Well, now new intelligence has surfaced, and this time in Bangladesh. The United States Embassy said there was reliable new information to suggest militants may be planning to target Australian interests in Bangladesh, saying such attacks could likely affect foreigners, including United States citizens. The embassy urged U.S. citizens to stay away from events where foreigners may gather and to maintain a high level of vigilance. Canada, Australia, and Britain have also advised their officials to limit attendance at events where foreigners may gather. Now, this comes on the heels of Cesare Tavella, an Italian who was shot down on Monday, and not just anywhere. He was shot down inside the diplomatic zone in Dhaka. Reports indicate a motorcycle came up alongside him while he was out for a run, shot him, and then sped off. Police have not confirmed that ISIS was involved in the shooting, but Western intelligence is making that link. Plus, this comes right after Ansar Allah Bangla Team, an extremist group inside Bangladesh. They just released a new hit list of 20 bloggers and free thinkers, both in and outside of Bangladesh. If we take a look inside Bangladesh, there is an uptick in violence perpetrated by extremist groups. If ISIS is involved, we can be sure that they are planning more. Regional leaders need to absolutely step up their game and do more. ISIS is nothing more than a cancer. It is a hate group, and it feeds on insecurities. Governments need to examine why ISIS is flourishing. We see that not only in the Asia-Pacific region, but throughout the world. What environments have been created that foster ISIS growth? Governments need to put an end to that. Yes, attack ISIS. Put an end to ISIS's infrastructure and capabilities. But unless you address the root cause, unless you change the environment that created ISIS, it will continue to flourish. It will continue to grow. Only by eradicating the environment that created ISIS can we destroy ISIS. Some analysts have come out and said that the new U.S.-China cybersecurity agreement marks a significant step in the cracking down on commercial espionage between China and other nations. I am not one of them. President Obama told a joint news conference last week that both countries had affirmed the principle that governments don't engage in cyber espionage for commercial gain against companies. Both nations also agreed to investigate online malicious activity towards one another that take place within their respective borders in a manner consistent with their respective national laws and relevant international obligations. The investigating nation will keep the victim nation updated as appropriate during such processes, while the victim nation won't be involved in any of the investigations. Some have called that agreement, as I mentioned before, a win for the Obama administration, essentially getting China to admit that cybercrime exists. You know what? That's very different than admitting that China is carrying out state-sponsored or is carrying out state-encouraged espionage. If we take a look to earlier this year at that big victory parade marking the end of World War II, one analyst called it a massive show of military hardware that was pilfered by corporate espionage. Essentially, China was flaunting its ability to garner secrets through cyber espionage. So the question is this: will China change? No. Why would it? China has absolutely nothing to gain. The only way we'll know if China is serious about changing its behavior towards cybercrime is if we see crackdowns on this inside China. If we see persecutions about cyber espionage, then we know that this agreement will be effective. But to date, the only crackdowns that we truly see are those for graft or others that are embarking in activity that Xi finds offensive, that Xi finds goes against his control for China. If we go back to the statement, this is the part to harp on. The investigating nation will keep the victim nation updated as appropriate during such processes, while the victim country won't be involved in any of the investigations. What this essentially says is that it gives the perpetrating country this line: hey, we're looking into it. We'll let you know if we find anything. And you know what I expect to see most of the time when we're dealing with China? Nothing. Well, my friends, that'll do it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this rather informal edition of the Asia Brief. If you did, please let me know. And of course, if you have any thoughts or opinions about these stories or anything else I share on the interwebs, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. The Asia Brief is a special feature of the Asia News Weekly podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with your friends, and if you haven't, subscribe. Subscribing is free, and when you do, the next episode is delivered automatically to you. You can subscribe on our website, asianewsweekly.net, or in your favorite podcast application. You can also keep up with more news from the region by following Asia News Weekly on Facebook or Twitter. And if you have any comments, questions, or feedback, be sure to drop us a line. That email address is podcast@asianewsweekly.net. Thank you so much for joining me. And until next time, remember to be true to yourself and to always be awesome.